uh, here's what I'm thinking as you say that, that it takes some work to, identify your values and then have sovereignty around them. So it's almost sort of a default to give other people that influence. And it's just, that's
Right.
what creates the power imbalance. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it's the way that we're conditioned, right? And that's what we're going to need to change. Is the way human beings are born very, very malleable. I'm sure you know that. You know that a human being is born fairly helpless, and that's not true, for example, of a foal. A foal is able to run around and eat grass, pretty quickly, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of mammals, the gestation period is not necessarily longer in terms of time, but longer in terms of development. So the kind of helpless stage that a baby goes through, that is all completed in the womb in many other mammals. Like, for example, for an elephant, a baby elephant is born and pretty quickly is up to speed,
Yep.
But a baby, their brain has not finished developing when they're born. So we spend the first few years in utter helplessness. You can't even walk for the first little while. You have to be carried around. You don't develop the capacity to speak or communicate. So we are utterly and completely dependent, which makes our brains remain extremely plastic for the first 7 years. I mean, your brain and therefore your beliefs can be therefore your behavior patterns and your emotional responses can be reformed in all sorts of ways in the first 7 years, which means that we're very, very, very impressionable. Whatever we're told in those first 7 years, it's going to take a lot of work to undo it. So just because of the way everything's structured, it's convenient. If you're going to have to look after other people, it's convenient to condition them towards obedience, right? That's what makes it manageable to be a steward to somebody else. So if you think about it, that maybe it's a little different now because we are maturing. Do you have children yourself?
I do, and I'm thinking of that. They're 2 and 4,
All
and
right.
it's so much easier when they are obedient. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, whenever your children ask why, the great gift you can give them, whenever your children say why, the great gift you can give them is to say, great question, let's discuss it, right? But that's not how many of us were raised, the parent says, clean your room. And the kid says, why, mama, why? And the parent says, because I tell you to, right? And this is maybe a little less now, but when I grew up, the word that the phrase that was repeated most often is, don't answer back to me. And if I asked why, I was told, because I told you to. That's enough of that, you see? So all of this is conditioning you to not be curious and to do what you're told. And that's called character building. And then I was sent to, this is, of course, years ago, decades ago, but I was sent to school at 4 years old. And now kindergartens are a little bit more playful. But then it was all about following the rules. And the way that education operated back then, and it's still true to some degree now, you learned by rote. 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, etc. You learned your times table. And we didn't have computers, so you just learn this off by heart. You'd learn all these facts. So it was a filling the bucket approach to education. You're an empty bucket and you're going to be filled with pre-assigned information. And then you do a test to see if you can repeat back what you've been fed. So at least education used to have very little emphasis on encouraging curiosity. Now, there are these great educational systems like Waldorf and Montessori and others that have flip that around and encourage children to be curious, which is how you become intelligent. But at least the default that we're moving away from is to condition obedience. So obedience in parenting, obedience in education, but also in religion, right? So when you go to church, there's a holy book, and that's what's true, what's written in the holy book. So the Bible and Wikipedia are different because Wikipedia is open source, right? Or even like quantum physics. Quantum physics and the Bible are different because quantum physics is open source. Anyone intelligent can make a contribution to quantum physics and the whole thing upgrades. And then the whole system across the world upgrades. Oh, now we understand this, right? So I was interviewing, for my podcast, I was interviewing a guy called Vlatko Vedral, who's a professor at Oxford University, professor of quantum mechanics. And he is trying to prove Schrodinger's cat experiment. In other words, that two quantum outcomes actually happen simultaneously. He's able to do that at a micro level, at a quantum level. Well, if he proves that, the entire field will be upgraded immediately. But that's not true in religion. You see, with the Bible or the Quran or any of the holy books, it's not open source. You can't upgrade it. It's like it's fixed, right?
Yep.
So we get conditioned by the way that parenting happens. We get conditioned by education. We get conditioned by religion. And then you get conditioned by a bunch of other things when you become a teenager, like what's cool and, what are you going to fit in with? You go and buy jeans that are pre-faded with rips because that's what's cool. Like it's more expensive to buy jeans with holes in them than ones that are in good shape, And then you get into the workplace. Now, there are some innovative workplaces that are realizing you get more value from people if you encourage them to think outside the box, like Zappos is like that, for example. But most workplaces make you a cog in a machine to further the predefined goals of the founders and their investors. So the entire society is conditioning you towards not asking why. And you get from an early age, you're punished if you ask why. Religion will say that you'll be damned and go to hell if you question the tenets of the Holy Book. So you're conditioned through terrifying scenarios to be obedient. Well, of course, then, having been kind of traumatized into this disposition, when you become an adult, many of us, we can form one of three dispositions towards authority. Either we maintain that obedient disposition, which means we really stay in our relationship towards authority, we stay pre-teen, right? Which means whatever we're told to do, we do it.
Yep.
Yeah. So in a minute, I'll just find you a beautiful quote from a Leonard Cohen song that illustrates this from A Thousand Kisses Deep. Hang on just a minute. Let's see if I can pull that up. Yeah, this is from the song A Thousand Kisses. It's from the song In My Secret Life. And hang on, I'll get that for you in a minute. Yeah. I bite my lip. I buy what I'm told. I buy what I'm told. From the latest hit to the wisdom of old. But I'm always alone, and my heart is like ice, and it's crowded and cold in my secret life. So that's, Leonard Cohen, the great bard of our collective anguish, who, that's such a great line. I buy what I'm told from the latest hit to the wisdom of old. And that's how we're conditioned. You're told what to buy because it's fashionable. You're told where to spend your money, and you're told where you must work and clock in and clock out to pay for all the stuff that somebody told you to buy, you see? So that's an obedient relationship towards authority. You do what you're told. Now, then there's a reaction to that, which is a teenage disposition towards authority. Many people just stay stuck for their whole lives in obedience. They do what they're told, right?
Yes.
They conform. A rebellious attitude towards authority is whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite, right? So, and that's actually, America has more of a teenage society than some other cultures. And you can see this in the reaction to COVID. South Korea managed to deal with COVID in like 2 weeks. They flattened the curve super quick. Same with Switzerland. They flattened the curve super quick because Switzerland is basically an obedient authority. It's an obedient culture. So if the government says, wear a mask, stay indoors, everybody, every single person wears a mask and stays indoors, and they flatten the curve very quickly, right? In America, Dr. Fauci and the CDC was staying flatten the curve and stay indoors, but the very president And his cohort said, no, I'm not going to do that. It doesn't look good on me. I'm not going to wear a mask. And so all the president's followers, and then you get this thing of conspirituality. Are you familiar with conspirituality? Do you know that podcast?
Mm-mm.
Oh, well, so it's interesting thing that in the last year, a lot of people who identify as kind of new age spiritual people actually ended up sort of adopting views that were very much consistent with right-wing people, which was because what they had in common was rebellion against authority, right? So this huge revolt in the Capitol on January 6th, we know the Capitol got overthrown. That was the extreme expression of rebellion against authority, right? So that's teenage disposition towards authority. Whatever you tell me to do, I'm going to do the opposite. And what happened in 2020, that spawned a massive amount of conspiracy theories. Like, you can't trust the media, you can't trust science, you can't trust anybody who looks like an authority figure. Bill Gates is evil. This was all reaction against authority, right? So now you've got these two dispositions. One is unquestioning obedience and allegiance to authority. Like, if this is an authority figure, they must be right. I'm going to follow what daddy says. Then you've got the opposite. Whatever they say is untrustworthy. And then there's the third category, which honestly right now probably doesn't constitute that big a segment of the population, which is what we could call sovereignty. It's an adult relationship to authority where you could say, okay, I'm going to join the conversation. I'm going to join the debate. So here's this scientist who's doing their best. Here's this investigative journalist who's doing their best. I'm going to digest what they're telling me, and I'm going to reflect upon it with discrimination. And I'm going to realize this person is not infallible. They're doing their best to move the conversation forward. So I noticed around COVID, for example, you could see different dispositions. The people who were obedient would wear a mask while hiking alone on a hiking trail. Like, what on earth, right? Like, in the middle of nowhere, you could see somebody like way ahead of you on the hiking trail wearing a mask. What is that supposed to do? I was wondering, do they wear a mask sleeping alone in their bed at night? Do they wear a mask in the shower? That's like an unquestioning relationship to authority. Like, they said wear a mask, I better wear a mask. And then you would get people who would just never wear a mask. There were people in my hometown who would literally go into the grocery store refusing to wear a mask. They would be asked to leave. They would refuse to leave, and they had to call the police because there was just this knee-jerk rebellion. And then you would find people who would wear a mask with intelligence, right? So they would realize if you're hiking on a trail and you walk past somebody at walking speed, you don't need a mask because you have to be in front of somebody for 2 minutes with just ordinary speaking for the droplets to actually have any chance of infecting you. So this would mean you're hearing the information, you're digesting it intelligently, and you're utilizing it with responsibility. That's a sovereign relationship to authority. If you develop sovereignty in all areas of your life, it means that you end up doing the work that you do because it's consistent with your values that you have discovered through your own process of introspection, and listening carefully to the whisper of divine intelligence. You marry the person you choose to marry for the same reason. You live in the place you choose to live, and you buy things with discrimination because you realize they're really good things to have in your life, not because someone's told you it's cool, And this requires discipline and sometimes support to realize, unless I apply discrimination and unless I deliberately unravel my conditioning, I'm going to end up in one of these conditioned responses. So to actually develop sovereignty in your life requires some kind of determination, discipline, and dedication to being an adult and to participate with other adults in co-creating a better world.
Wow. Yeah, this is fantastic. I've never heard someone describe how we came to this power dynamic